Snow fell heavily across the Vladivostok military base, blanketing the iron roofs and frozen fields in silence. Soldiers from Russia, China, and South Africa stood in perfect formation, their breath forming white clouds in the air. Among them stood a tall, dark-skinned soldier from the South African Special Forces, Thabo Mzimba, known for his calm eyes and unshakable composure. Today was his turn to represent his homeland by demonstrating the ancient Nguni stick-fighting art, a martial tradition passed down through warriors of his ancestors. As Thabo stepped into the circle, two slender fighting sticks in hand, a murmur rippled through the crowd. His movements began slowly, a rhythmic dance of balance, defense, and spirit. He twisted, parried, and redirected imaginary strikes, his feet gliding across the snow. Yet, the foreign soldiers watching from the stands could not resist laughter. "Is that a fight or a folk dance?" one Russian soldier jeered. "Maybe he's entertaining us before dinner," another added, grinning. But Thabo's expression did not change. His eyes were fixed on the invisible rhythm of his heritage, one that taught grace over aggression. Each motion flowed like water, yet carried the latent strength of a storm. The sound of sticks cutting through air began to draw silence. Even mockery turned into curiosity. Then, a confident voice broke the stillness. "Interesting technique," said Colonel Elena Petrovna, stepping forward from the Russian ranks. Her blonde hair shimmered under the floodlights. Her sharp green eyes focused on Thabo. "But tell me, soldier, can that pretty dance survive a real fight?" Thabo lowered his sticks respectfully and replied calmly, "Colonel, Nguni fighting is not about aggression. It's about restraint. The strength to hold back when you could strike." Elena smirked, folding her arms. "Restraint doesn't win wars, Sergeant. Power does." Thabo's gaze stayed steady. Power without control destroys. Control gives power meaning. The crowd went quiet again. Soldiers exchanged glances. Even the biting wind seemed to pause. Elena stepped closer, her boots crunching on the snow. "Then prove it," she said, her voice firm but teasing. "If your Nguni stick fighting can defeat my Russian combat technique in 3 minutes, I'll marry you." Gasps and laughter erupted from every corner. Some soldiers whistled, others clapped. The cold air crackled with energy. But Thabo only smiled faintly, lowering his eyes in humility. 3 minutes, he said softly. Enough time to show the difference between pride and honor. Elena's smirk faded, replaced by a curious glint. The soldiers leaned in, sensing something far beyond a simple challenge. In that frozen moment, under the falling snow, two worlds, one built on discipline and another on dominance, quietly collided. No one there could have guessed that what was about to unfold was not just a duel, but the beginning of a story that would test not only strength, but the human heart itself. The night had fallen deep over Vladivostok, the military base shimmering faintly under tall floodlights. The wind howled against the barracks, carrying with it the scent of snow and metal. Most soldiers had retreated to warmth, their laughter fading behind steel doors. But one man still stood alone on the open field, Thabo Mzimba. His breath came in calm rhythm as he swung his fighting sticks in slow, deliberate circles. Each motion carved invisible shapes into the frozen air. The cold bit into his skin, but his movements flowed with the grace of a silent prayer. The snow crunched softly beneath his boots, as if nature itself was keeping time with him. In the distance, a pair of steady footsteps echoed. Thabo paused, his instinct sharp. From the darkness emerged Colonel Elena Petrovna, wrapped in a long gray coat, her golden hair catching the faint light. Her expression was unreadable, somewhere between admiration and curiosity. "Still training at this hour?" she asked in her accented English, her tone firm, but no longer mocking. Thabo straightened and bowed slightly. "The body freezes when the soul becomes still, Colonel. I must keep both awake." Elena folded her arms, watching the rhythmic twirl of his sticks. "You speak like a philosopher, not a soldier," she said softly. "Tell me, Thabo, do you believe these traditions can truly win against modern warfare?" He smiled faintly, lowering one of his sticks. Nguni stick fighting was never about conquering others. It was about conquering oneself. Our ancestors taught that the fiercest enemy lives inside, in pride, fear, and anger. Elena was silent. The idea struck her like an unexpected gust of wind. She had been trained to dominate, to calculate, to strike before being struck. Yet this man spoke of restraint, as if it were strength itself. "You know," she said finally, "if you lose tomorrow, this will all be forgotten. Just a soldier's joke." Thabo looked up, his breath visible in the freezing air. "And if I win?" Elena hesitated, her green eyes flickering. "Then perhaps I'll believe there's more to strength than power." They stood, facing each other, the snow falling heavier between them, the silence charged with unspoken challenge. Thabo could see in her eyes the remnants of pride slowly giving way to curiosity. "You don't fear me, do you?" she asked suddenly. Thabo's voice was calm. "I do not fear what I respect." For a moment, Elena had no reply. The wind roared through the base, rattling the flagpoles above them. Then, with a faint smirk that barely hid her confusion, she turned away. "Rest, Sergeant. Tomorrow, I won't go easy on you." Thabo watched her walk back toward the barracks, her footsteps leaving shallow prints in the snow. His gaze lingered for a moment, not out of attraction, but understanding. When he finally sat on his bunk, he looked at his hands. These were not hands meant to harm. They were made to protect meaning, to prove that honor could still stand against arrogance. He whispered into the stillness, "Tomorrow, I won't fight her. I'll fight the idea that strength means destruction." Outside, the snow kept falling, like white embers over a battlefield yet to begin. Morning broke over Vladivostok like a pale scar across the frozen horizon. The sunlight barely pierced through the mist, scattering gold over fields blanketed in snow. The military base was alive with movement. Soldiers from Russia, China, and South Africa hurried across the compound, whispers spreading faster than the cold wind. Everyone knew what was coming. The duel between Colonel Elena Petrovna and Sergeant Thabo Mzimbi. Inside his small barrack room, Thabo sat quietly on the edge of his bed, tightening the straps on his boots. His fellow soldiers, 2 South Africans from his unit, watched in a silence filled with pride. "They're calling it the match of the year," one said softly. "A Russian colonel against a South African warrior." Thabo smiled faintly, his eyes distant. "It's not a match," he replied. "It's a lesson for all of us." Outside, flags of the three nations fluttered stiffly in the icy breeze. A large circular arena had been cleared in the snow, its edges lined with ropes and cameras. The brass officers sat in rows along the front benches. Every lens, every eye was pointed at the two figures who were about to turn a joint military exercise into history. Elena stood in the dressing tent, staring at herself in the mirror. Her blue combat uniform hugged her tall frame. Her hair, tied tightly, gleamed like frost. She remembered his words from the night before. "I do not fear what I respect." Something about that sentence had been haunting her. She had faced stronger men before, faster opponents, but never someone whose calm unsettled her so deeply. Her instructor stepped forward. "Remember, Colonel," he said, "no mercy. The world will be watching." Elena nodded, though her reflection no longer looked like the same woman who had issued a careless challenge. Outside, the whistle blew once, the signal. The crowd stirred. Thabo walked into the arena first. His black uniform contrasted sharply with the whiteness around him, a symbol of grounded earth against the chill of winter. He carried his twin sticks, carved smooth from hard African wood. As he stepped into the ring, he bowed first to the officer's stand, then to the flag, and finally to the ground itself. Moments later, Elena appeared. The soldiers erupted in cheers. She walked with her usual authority, but her steps slowed as she approached Thabo. When their eyes met, the crowd's noise faded. For a fleeting second, there was no competition, only recognition. The Russian referee raised his arm. 3 minutes. No weapons beyond your art. No mercy. No retreat. Elena dropped into her stance. Forward. Aggressive. Ready to strike. Thabo lowered himself into a low, flowing Nguni position. One stick raised like a shield, the other ready to redirect, not destroy. A long whistle cut through the cold air. The duel began. Elena lunged first, her movement swift as a blade. Thabo stepped aside, the tip of her strike missing him by inches. His counter was not a strike, but a glide. A flowing circle that guided her motion away. Gasps rose from the spectators. Even in the first 10 seconds, they could feel it. This wasn't a fight between two soldiers. It was a conversation between power and balance, between anger and calm. And somewhere in the middle of that frozen field, the world began to realize something extraordinary was unfolding. The whistle's echo lingered in the icy air as the two figures circled each other. A faint mist rose from their breath, glowing under the morning light. The crowd was utterly silent now. The mockery and laughter of the previous day replaced by anticipation. Colonel Elena Petrovna moved first. She darted forward, her steps precise, her stance sharp. Years of Russian combat training pulsed through every motion, fast, calculated, ruthless. She swung low, then high, her strikes designed to overwhelm. But Thabo was not there. His feet glided lightly across the snow. He swayed, twisted, and slipped past each blow like a shadow the light couldn't catch. His sticks barely touched hers, yet each touch changed the direction of her force. It wasn't defense, it was redirection, a dance where her aggression turned against itself. The sound of wood tapping against wood echoed like soft drum beats. Elena's jaw tightened. No opponent had ever stood before her with such calm indifference. "Fight me seriously," she snapped. attacking again with a spinning hook strike aimed at his ribs. Thabo bent low, his body nearly parallel to the ground, and swept his stick upward, meeting her force but never matching it. The motion sent a flurry of snow into the air, dazzling the onlookers. He then stepped back, bowing slightly, eyes steady. "I am fighting you, Colonel," he said softly, "just not in the way you expect." A murmur rippled through the audience. Even the Russian officers leaned forward, curious and uneasy. Elena's pride was beginning to crack beneath her composure. She lunged again, this time faster, angrier. Her movements grew louder, heavier, punches of fury against his silence. Thabo moved like wind over water, gentle but unyielding. He allowed her energy to pass through him. Each strike absorbed, turned, and released harmlessly. The rhythm of his motion drew whispers from the Chinese contingent. "He's not fighting. He's flowing." 2 minutes had passed. Sweat glistened on Elena's forehead, freezing at the edges. Her breathing quickened, yet Thabo's chest rose and fell in steady rhythm. His eyes never left hers. In that gaze, she saw something that unsettled her more than defeat: peace. Suddenly, she feinted left, then struck from the right, catching him off balance for a split second. Her hand grabbed his arm, twisting into a takedown. The crowd gasped. The Russian colonel had her moment. But before her move could complete, Thabo dropped his center of gravity, his stick catching her forearm just enough to shift her momentum sideways. Instead of hitting the ground, she found herself spinning harmlessly past him. He could have struck then, could have ended it, but he didn't. He simply turned and tapped his stick on the ground once. Elena froze, chest heaving. "Why didn't you finish me?" she demanded. Thabo's voice was calm, but carried across the field. "Because victory without respect is still defeat." The soldiers, watching, fell silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. Elena straightened slowly, breathing hard. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about how to win. She was thinking about what he meant. The whistle blew, signaling the final minute. And though the fight wasn't over, something inside her already had begun to change. The whistle marked the last minute. The crowd leaned forward, hearts pounding in unison. The air was frozen, yet every soul on that field could feel the heat building between the two warriors. Not hatred, not rivalry, but something deeper, something that felt alive. Elena steadied her breath. Her eyes locked on Thabo, whose stance remained low, balanced, serene. His twin sticks moved slowly, tracing invisible lines in the air, as if measuring the rhythm of her heartbeat. His calm was unbearable. It made her question everything she'd learned about combat. "Enough philosophy," she whispered to herself. "Time to end this." With a surge of speed, she lunged forward. Her body became a blur, a soldier trained by the harshest winters, charging with the full force of pride and discipline. Her strikes were brutal now, a storm of wooden flashes aiming for his shoulders, his legs, his ribs. The sound of impact filled the arena. Crack, tap, crack. Thabo met each strike with a precision that looked impossible. Every time her stick came down, his moved like a river against stone, diverting, guiding, redirecting. He wasn't fighting against her, he was fighting with her motion. At one point, her attack slipped through, grazing his shoulder. The crowd gasped. A small streak of red appeared on his sleeve. But instead of retreating, Thabo smiled. "Now we're speaking the same language," he said softly. Elena froze for half a breath. His tone wasn't mocking. It was appreciative, almost kind. And that confused her. In her world, kindness didn't belong in combat. Yet here he was, bleeding and calm, looking at her as if she were not an enemy, but a reflection. She attacked again. A sudden spin followed by a sweeping leg strike meant to knock him down. But Thabo dropped instantly into the low shield parry stance, catching her stick between his own. The sound echoed sharply. Using the force of her momentum, he pivoted, guiding her movement around him in a circular motion. The crowd held its breath. Her body twisted midair. For a moment, it looked like she was falling. But Thabo caught her by the shoulder, stopping her descent just before her back hit the ground. He knelt beside her, one knee in the snow, the other steady like the root of a tree. The whistle blew. 3 minutes were over. Silence. Only the sound of heavy breathing filled the air. Elena looked up at him, dazed. Sweat mixed with snow on her forehead. "You stopped me from falling?" she whispered. Thabo nodded. No warrior deserves to hit the ground in disgrace. She blinked rapidly, unsure whether to feel anger, humiliation, or gratitude. Finally, she said softly, 2 minutes and 48 seconds. "You won." Before time ran out, the referee raised Thabo's hand. The crowd erupted in applause. Russian, Chinese, and South African soldiers stood to salute. But Thabo did not raise his arms in triumph. He simply bowed, his eyes closed, his heart steady. Elena stood, facing him, her expression unreadable. She extended her hand. "You're not just a fighter," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You're a teacher." Thabo bowed again. "And you, Colonel, are a mirror. Through you, I saw the purpose of my strength." The applause swelled like thunder over the snow, echoing across the frozen fields. Cameras flashed. The duel was over. But something far more powerful had begun. The cheers still echoed long after the duel had ended. Soldiers clapped, shouted, and even whistled. But amid all that noise, Thabo Mazimbi stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the snowy ground where just minutes ago, pride, power, and restraint had collided. The cold bit into his skin, but his heart was strangely warm. He hadn't fought to win. He had fought to show. Across the arena, Colonel Elena Petrovna stood quietly, her breath forming white clouds in the freezing air. The applause around her faded into a distant hum. Her body ached, not from defeat, but from something she couldn't name, realization. She remembered his words. Victory without respect is still defeat. For years, she had measured strength in bruises and scars. Now, a man she barely knew had dismantled her philosophy in less than 3 minutes. An officer approached her, grinning. "Colonel, that was an incredible fight. He's lucky you didn't go harder." Elena forced a polite smile. "Yes," she said absently, "very lucky." But in her heart, she knew. It wasn't luck. It was something else. Something she had never trained for. Humility. As the crowd dispersed, Thabo approached quietly, still holding one of his fighting sticks. He stopped a few feet away and bowed his head slightly. "You fought with courage, Colonel." "You made me better," he said. Elena looked at him, trying to read his sincerity. "You talk as if you lost," she said softly. Thabo smiled. "I didn't come here to make anyone lose. I came to prove that control is stronger than chaos." There was no arrogance in his tone, only peace. and that made it harder for her to respond. She had spent her life surrounded by men who needed to prove dominance. This man had proven something far greater. That true strength doesn't shout, it listens. The cold wind carried the faint sound of a Russian anthem playing over the speakers. Around them, soldiers packed their equipment, laughing and talking. But the two of them seemed cut off from time. "I underestimated you," Elena admitted, her voice low. "I thought you were just another man trying to impress me." Thabo chuckled softly. "Maybe I was trying to impress something greater, the truth behind every warrior's heart." Her eyes softened. "And what is that truth?" "That every battle is a mirror. Sometimes it shows us our skill. Sometimes our weakness." She stared at him, caught between admiration and unease. No one had ever spoken to her like this. Not as a superior, not as a subordinate, but as an equal. Snowflakes drifted between them, melting on their warm breaths. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Elena took a deep breath. "I said I'd marry you if you beat me in 3 minutes." Her lips curved into a faint smile. "Do you still expect me to keep that promise?" Thabo looked at her, calm and sincere. "Promises born from pride should not bind the heart, Colonel, but respect, that should never be broken." Elena's eyes lingered on his for a few seconds longer than she intended. Then she turned away, hiding the strange warmth rising in her chest. Above them, the sun finally broke through the gray clouds, casting light over the snow. A quiet symbol of something new dawning, not just for the two of them, but for what they both believed in. The day had surrendered to a pale Russian evening. The sun slipped behind the frozen hills, leaving the sky painted in streaks of silver and rose. The Vladivostok base was unusually calm. No gunfire drills, no shouted commands, only the quiet crunch of boots over snow. The duel between Thabo Mzimbi and Colonel Elena Petrovna had become the talk of the entire camp. Yet, amid the murmurs of admiration and disbelief, both warriors remained silent. Thabo sat alone under a tall pine tree near the edge of the training field. His 2 fighting sticks lay beside him, half buried in snow. He was polishing them with a cloth, tracing the faint scratches left by the battle. Every mark told a story, not of victory, but of understanding. The sky above him was heavy with stars, cold and distant. He closed his eyes and let the sounds of the night reach him. The distant hum of machinery, the whistle of wind, and the faint rhythmic beat of his own heart. For years, combat had been his language, but tonight, silence was teaching him more than war ever had. Behind him, quiet footsteps approached. He didn't turn. He already knew who it was. "You always train, even after the day ends," Elena's voice came, soft and thoughtful. Thabo smiled faintly without looking back. "And you always arrive when the world falls quiet." She exhaled, her breath visible in the frosty air. "I couldn't sleep," she confessed, walking closer. She wore a long coat, her posture less formal than usual. "Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the moment you stopped me from falling." Thabo turned slightly, meeting her gaze. "You weren't falling, Colonel. You were changing direction." Elena laughed under her breath. "You talk like a poet trapped in a soldier's body." He shrugged gently. "Maybe that's all a warrior should be, someone who fights without losing his humanity." They stood in silence for a moment. The pine branches above rustled softly as the wind passed through. "I've been thinking," Elena said, lowering her voice. "All my life, I was taught that control means domination. That victory is the only proof of strength. But you fight as if peace is your goal." Thabo nodded. "In Nguni, we say a true fighter knows when to stop. Power isn't measured by how many you defeat, but by how many you protect." Her eyes softened. "Then you've protected my pride, Sergeant." Thabo smiled. "And you've protected my faith, that even an enemy can listen." A long silence followed, but it wasn't uncomfortable. The snow glimmered around them like scattered starlight. Elena folded her arms, her eyes wandering to the horizon. "Do you believe in destiny?" she asked quietly. Thabo took a moment before answering. "I believe in paths. Destiny is just the road we build. By every choice we make," Elena looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Perhaps admiration, perhaps something gentler. Then today, we built a road neither of us expected," she whispered. He bowed his head slightly. "And maybe, Colonel, it's a road that doesn't end in battle." The air grew still again. She hesitated for a moment, then reached down, brushing snow off one of his sticks. "You left your mark, Thabo," she said softly, "not just on this field, but here." She touched her chest briefly, over her heart. Thabo didn't reply. He didn't need to. The look in his eyes said everything: gratitude, respect, and something just beginning to bloom, fragile as thawing snow. Above them, the Russian night deepened, and for the first time since the war games began, both soldiers felt at peace. 2 days had passed since the duel, yet the echoes of that morning still lingered through the Vladivostok base. Soldiers continued to whisper about the South African who had defeated the Russian colonel without breaking her spirit. Some spoke with admiration, others with disbelief. But no one could deny one truth. The way Thabo Mzimbi had fought had changed something in the air. For Colonel Elena Petrovna, the change was even deeper. Every night, she replayed those moments in her mind. The soft rhythm of his movements, the gentleness in his restraint, and that haunting line he had spoken: "Victory without respect is still defeat." On the morning of the third day, she awoke to find a small brown envelope on her desk, sealed with the insignia of the South African unit. Her pulse quickened. She broke the seal carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly, written in clear, deliberate handwriting. "Colonel, forgive my intrusion. I write not as a rival, but as a student of what we both have learned. In my land, after a battle, we give thanks, not for the win, but for the lesson the opponent gave us. You have taught me something greater than victory, that courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to face truth. May our paths cross again, not on a battlefield, but under a sky of peace. Thabo Mzimbi." Elena read the words twice, then again. Each line carried the same steady rhythm as his movements: calm, unforced, deeply human. She felt her throat tighten. It wasn't a love letter. It was something rarer. A bridge between souls who had met through conflict but stayed through respect. For the first time in her military career, Elena didn't know what to say. She placed the letter on her desk, then sat in silence, her hands trembling slightly. Around her, The sounds of the base seemed distant. The march of boots, the buzz of radios, the drone of aircraft. None of it could drown the voice echoing in her memory. That evening, she found herself walking toward the same pine tree where she had last spoken to him. The snow had begun to melt into thin streams, reflecting the golden light of sunset. She half expected to find him there, practicing, meditating, simply existing. But he was gone. On the ground lay 2 wooden sticks crossed gently, and beneath them a small piece of cloth, the flag patch of South Africa. Tucked under it was a short note in his handwriting. "Every stick fight ends with peace, Colonel. That's how we honor the earth beneath our feet." She knelt, her breath trembling, and touched the sticks gently as though touching his presence. A tear slipped down her cheek. Not from sorrow, but from clarity. For years, she had lived in a world of orders, where emotion was weakness and mercy a liability. Yet here, in this frozen place, a man from halfway across the world had shown her a truth she could never unsee, that the strongest hearts are the ones that can choose peace even when trained for war. As she rose, the wind swept softly across the field, lifting her hair like a whisper. She looked toward the sky, pale, vast, endless, and smiled faintly. "You've changed me, Sergeant," she murmured, "and you don't even know it." The snow continued to boil, but it no longer felt cold. The day of departure arrived beneath a pale Russian sun. The snow, once thick and defiant, had begun to soften. Thin streams of meltwater traced patterns along the concrete of the Vladivostok base. Flags from all 3 nations fluttered lazily in the cold wind, while soldiers gathered in rows for the official farewell ceremony that would mark the end of the joint war games. On the platform stood Colonel Elena Petrovna, her posture straight, uniform immaculate, but her heart unsteady. It had been 4 days since the duel, 4 days since she had received Thabo Mzimbi's letter, and still his words echoed in her mind. The ceremony wasn't supposed to be emotional. It was a formal event, a show of unity among allies. But as she looked across the sea of soldiers, her eyes caught sight of Thabo standing in the South African formation, tall, calm, his dark uniform outlined by a faint shimmer of frost. He was listening attentively, hands clasped behind his back, eyes steady as ever. The Russian general began the proceedings, his voice booming through the speakers. He spoke of cooperation, strategy, and victory, words Elena had heard all her life, but which now felt strangely hollow. Her pulse quickened when the general turned toward her. "Colonel Petrovna," he said, "you have something to add on behalf of the Russian division?" She hadn't planned to. She was supposed to stand silently, nod respectfully, and let protocol carry the moment. But instead, she stepped forward to the microphone. The crowd went still. Her voice began firm, controlled. "Comrades," she said, "we came here to test our strength. But in doing so, we discovered something greater." She paused, her gaze drifting toward Thabo. "We learned that discipline is not just in the strike. It's in the pause before it. Power is not in destruction. It's in mercy." Whispers passed through the ranks. Some soldiers exchanged puzzled looks. Others listened with quiet respect. Elena continued, her tone softening. 4 days ago, I met a man who reminded me that our enemies are not the ones standing across from us, but the pride that blinds us within. In 3 minutes, he showed me that restraint can be the highest form of courage. She didn't say his name. She didn't need to. Everyone knew. In the crowd, Thabo stood unmoving, his expression unreadable. Yet his heart thudded heavier with each word. Elena drew a breath and finished. If every soldier could fight with such honor, the world would have fewer wars to begin with. Let this alliance not only strengthen our armies, but our understanding of what true strength means. A silence fell that was deeper than applause. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then, slowly, the Russian general began clapping. Others followed, first cautiously, then louder, until the sound rolled like thunder over the frozen field. Elena stepped back from the podium, her chest rising with quiet relief. She looked once more toward Thabo. Their eyes met. A brief moment that spoke everything words could not: gratitude, respect, and an unspoken farewell. When the ceremony ended, the soldiers dispersed toward their transport vehicles. Elena remained on the stage, watching as the South African convoy prepared to leave. Thabo glanced back once. A faint smile curved his lips, the kind that belonged to a man who carried peace instead of victory. He raised his hand in a brief salute, not military, but human. Elena returned the gesture, her throat tightening. The engines roared to life, filling the air with their deep hum. Snow swirled upward in the wake of the departing trucks, blurring her vision, and as the last convoy disappeared into the white horizon, she whispered into the cold air, "Go well, Sergeant. The world needs more men like you." Weeks passed since the farewell at Vladivostok, but the memory of that snowy field lingered like an unending echo. In two distant lands, one wrapped in the heat of the African sun, the other cloaked in the gray chill of a Russian spring, two souls carried the same silence inside them. In South Africa, Thabo Mzimba returned to his coastal base. The scent of salt and acacia trees replaced the metallic bite of snow. Each morning, he trained by the ocean's edge, the sound of waves crashing against rocks blending with the steady rhythm of his sticks. Yet, something had changed in him. His movements were slower now, not out of fatigue, but reflection. He wasn't fighting invisible enemies anymore. He was conversing with memory. When his fellow soldiers teased him about the Russian colonel, Thabo only smiled. They didn't understand. It wasn't romance he carried home, but revelation. She had been his mirror, showing him that strength meant nothing if it couldn't inspire peace. One evening, as the sun melted into the Indian Ocean, he knelt on the sand and unfolded a small piece of fabric. The blue scarf Elena had dropped during the final day of the war games. He pressed it gently to the ground. "Thank you, Colonel," he murmured, "for teaching me that even the strongest hearts can be kind." Thousands of miles away, in Russia, Colonel Elena Petrovna stood at her office window, overlooking the gray expanse of sea. The sound of wind against glass was all she heard. Her desk, once buried in tactical reports and maps, now held only one object: a pair of wooden sticks crossed in quiet symmetry. She had requested to keep them after Thabo's departure. No one argued. Perhaps they understood that something in her had softened, not weakened, but awakened. That night, she opened her journal, a habit she hadn't kept since her early cadet days. Her handwriting was neat, controlled, like her thoughts used to be. but her words carried warmth she could no longer deny. He fought without anger. He won without pride. And he left without claiming victory. If this is what peace looks like, I hope it finds us again. A faint smile touched her lips. She looked toward the night sky. Somewhere beyond the vast clouds, she knew he was looking at the same stars. The following morning, she gave a small speech at a military academy in Moscow. Her message was simple. Teach your soldiers not only how to strike, but when not to. The greatest wars are not won on battlefields, but in the quiet moments when mercy triumphs over rage. Her words rippled through the crowd. Some nodded, some didn't understand, but she knew Thabo would have. That evening, as the sun vanished over the Russian horizon, Elena stood outside, her breath visible in the cooling air. "Under the same sky," she whispered, "may he know I remember." And at that same moment, far across the ocean, Thabo looked up at the stars above the African coast, whispering the same words. Two hearts, two lands, one sky, and between them, not love, not loss, but a bond of honor that would live longer than war, distance, or time.